Hey, what's up everybody? It's Jeff. Now, if you're trying to get your MCP server installed in your enterprise environment and you're running across a few problems, then we wanted to walk through the most common problems we found during our testing and what the troubleshooting tips are to get you up and running. So there's really four common failure scenarios that we've seen so far. And the first one is that you don't have NPX installed on your local machine. The second one is that you may have made some mistakes in your Splunk side roles, users, or token configuration that's causing problems. The third issue is that you might be running across an obscure failure around a local host when making your first MCP call. And the last issue is that you might see some issues with SSL certification problems like untrusted certs or self-signed certs during an MCP call. Let's walk through each of these and cover what it looks like when it fails and how to fix it. Okay, so let's start with the first issue, NPX not installed. Now, in my example, I'm using Claude Desktop to showcase what these failures look like, but this is going to be the case with just about any application that you use to call Splunk MCP server, since it's dependent upon NPX. So in this particular case, I have my Splunk MCP JSON well configured, but when I launch Claude, I get some obscure errors around Splunk MCP spawn problems. And then if you click on the open the developer settings, it'll take you to the Claude logging, and you'll see more logs that are similar to what we saw in the UI, which is, kind of that failure to spawn. And this is all happening because I don't have NPX installed on my local machine. And if you want to confirm that, you can open up a terminal and type the command which NPX, and you'll see whether or not it's installed. So this one's pretty simple. In order to fix it, just go and get NPX installed on your local machine or whatever machine is making that MCP call. Okay, so let's move on to the next issue that we see happening pretty often, and that's going to be some sort of a problem with your Splunk side RBAC configurations. We're talking about the role, the user, and the token configuration that you did in Splunk. Once again, if you get this wrong and you open up Claude, you're going to see a pretty basic error message, and much more helpful information is going to be seen if you open up the log file. The smoking gun that's telling us that we have an RBAC problem is this error that says insufficient permission to access the resource. It's a really good indication that we screwed up something in our RBAC configurations. So in order to fix this, you really want to go back to Splunk and just triple check the following configurations. The first, did you remember to create an MCP role? And did you remember to grant the appropriate MCP capabilities into that role? Secondly, did you remember to assign the new MCP role that you just created to one or more Splunk users? After that, when you're creating the token, you have to remember to select the correct user within that token, and you want to make sure that you got the audience correct. That audience must say MCP. And then finally, once you got your token, did you correctly copy it into your MCP JSON? You probably screwed up one of those steps along the way if you're getting those permission denied problems. Okay, so the next challenge that you might run across is this obscure localhost error that happens when you make your first MCP call. And this particular error can actually be seen directly from the user interface. I typed in what indexes do I have in Splunk, and Claude successfully recognized that it needed to call the get indexes tool to answer that question. But when it made that call, it returned this 500 error indicating that the hostname localhost doesn't match either of blah, 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 blah. Now, if you open up the log files, you're not going to get much more helpful information, but you're going to see just about the same error happening in the log files. Okay, so why is this happening and how do we fix it? This is an issue in the code that I hope we eventually address, and if not, I hope we address it in our documentation, because effectively this is a configuration change that you have to make in Splunk, and we don't have that well documented yet. So in order to fix this problem, you want to SSH into your Splunk instance. You're going to need to go to your opt Splunk etc apps folder, specifically the Splunk MCP server app, and you're going to add the mcp.conf file under your local folder. In that file, you're going to create a new server stanza, and that server stanza will contain one configuration that is a field base URL whose value equals the path to your port 8089 or whatever your REST endpoint port is. And this can just be seen. Server stanza, you add base URL equals, and then exactly as I've highlighted that endpoint there, up to 8089/. That should solve that problem. Okay, so another fun one that we have seen is this SSL certificate issue during an MCP server call. So if your call fails, you might see something in the UI, but if you open up your Claude server logs, you are going to see something like error caused by a self-signed cert in the chain. This is almost certainly what you're going to see if you have this SSL certificate problem, and then we have to go fix it. Okay, so why is this happening? What's going on? Well, this is kind of the call chain when Claude calls Splunk MCP. The first thing is Claude desktop is going to call the MCP REST endpoint over port 8089. But then, in order to actually service the final call, Splunk is going to call another Splunk endpoint over port 8089. So just to recap, the first call is done by Claude to Splunk using NPX, hitting that services MCP endpoint. But the second call is done Splunk to Splunk over port 8089. Okay, and so the earliest versions of the MCP server, both the Claude side call and the Splunk side call are going to fail. But the good news is, in the most recent version of the MCP server, that's version 0.2.4, the Splunk side call should no longer fail. So you should only have to follow the first part of these troubleshooting steps. Now, how do you know if it's an untrusted cert? Just take your MCP services endpoint, put that in Chrome, and go. And if you see this particular error, then you know you're going to run it. You know that 8089 is an untrusted cert and that you're going to encounter this problem. Okay, so how do we fix it? Well, there's really two ways to fix it. There's the correct or preferred solution, and then there's the hack or workaround option. So as most of you know, Splunk ships by default with port 8089 running with a self-signed cert. Okay, and so what we expect you to do is to insert your own trusted certificate over port 8089, and our docs pages cover how to go do that. However, if you're just trying to tinker, get Splunk working, you want to move quick, you don't mind that port 8089 is running with that self-signed cert, then your second option would be to configure both Claude and Splunk to ignore these untrusted cert problems. So I'm going to walk through how you would do that. This is a two-part fix. We have to fix the Claude side call, and then we also have to fix the Splunk side call. So starting on the Claude side call, all we need to do is update our MCP JSON to include a little bit of additional information to tell NPX to ignore that untrusted cert call. And that's really the environment variable that you see here at the bottom with the node TLS reject unauthorized 0. So this is a configuration change that, that you can make in your MCP JSON, and it will pass this along to NPX and ignore that on the first call, but you'll still have the problem on the second call. So in order to fix the second call, we also need to update Splunk to ensure that Splunk ignores the untrusted certs. And you can do this by editing a configuration file for kind of a permanent fix, or if you just want to do it temporarily, you can do it via an environment variable and then just restart Splunk. So export Python HTTPS verify equals 0, double and Splunk restart. That should allow Splunk to restart, and we'll be ignoring these self-signed certs, and that should fix that problem. All right, those are all of the issues that we have found while testing MCP servers on Splunk Enterprise instances. I hope this was helpful.